Hi, welcome to episode 3 of our Hegemony mapping tutorial, where we are rebuilding the Macedonia map from Hegemony Gold in the new Hegemony 3 editor. If you guys will remember, just to catch you up, on our first episode we imported some height field data from NASA, and that built this automatic height field here of the central portion of ancient Greece. And in episode 2 we started placing pathfinding regions, which are these red boxes here, and those control where troops are allowed to move on the map. In this episode, we're going to touch on how to place resource buildings, so that's farms, mines, cattle farms, fisheries, etc., and also how to place to fill them up with buildings and civilians, so all these little guys and chickens, of course. So to start off, placing resource buildings, we switch to the city mode here, and then to the draw tool, which is shortcut 7. Now, one of the tricks we did for placing resource buildings in Hegemony 3 was we'd go through city by city, and we had a rough proportion of resources that we wanted to place on the map. By keeping the proportions the same, it was easier to go back later and balance the actual numbers while keeping everything consistent relative to each other. So our numbers roughly with the Hegemony 3 map were 6 units of food, 4 units of gold, and about 1.5 units of wood per city. Now those weren't separate buildings. Those farms were considered 3 units of food, fisheries 2, vineyards were 2 gold, 1 food, and cattle farms were 1 gold, 2 food. So, to get started on that, let's pick a city. We'll do Edessa here in the middle of our map. So let's give it a couple farms. So we select that on the right side list and use the draw tool here at the top. And we'll place a farm. Let's just place a farm right here. So drop that down, you get a little blue circle. The line in it represents the entrance, which direction units move in and out of it. So we're going to hit 3, the rotate tool, and just spin that around so it's facing into the movable territory. The only real rule with placing resources is they need to be within the red pathfinding boxes. If we were to, I'll use 2 here and drag it out. If we were to put it outside, units would never be able to get there. So we want to make sure it's in. If you do accidentally put it outside, one of the tools we added later on in the game to check that is up at the top, next unregioned building, and that will jump around between all the buildings that are out of bounds. So let's move that back in. So that's 1 farm, or about 3 units of food. Let's place another one. Let's just drop it over here. Now the benefit of this technique is it helps us keep track per city, because it gets confusing very quickly when you start placing on the map as to whose farm this, what city this farm technically belongs to. So if we do them 1 city at a time, we can place them anywhere on the map, but know we'll have the right number by the end of it. So that's 2 units of food. We will put a mine. We'll drop it here in this corner next to the mountain. And 1 wood mill we'll put over here. We've changed techniques a little bit over the course of the games. If you'll remember, on this original map in Hegemony Gold, the farms tend to be right around the cities. Since then, we've kind of been pushing them further away, so they're in a little more contested territory to create a little more conflict between factions over control of those resources. So you might end up placing a farm that's officially for Edessa way over in this valley here that's a little less populated. But of course, the placement of those is up to the strategy you want to create. So if you can have a concentration of food in a particular area, or a higher concentration of gold, etc. So that places a couple for those cities. So using that formula I mentioned earlier, that doesn't totally add up to the numbers. So we've got half a wood to carry over to the next city, as well as 1 gold. So if we place, go down here to Amathia, I believe. Amathia, we will need 2 wood mills to make an average of 1.5. So let's place that down here in the corner. And we'll put another one way over here in this valley. do a cattle farm. There's a little cattle farm up on the cliff here. You can see we've done a fair bit more map editing than you would have caught in the last video. We've got most of the major cities in the game are, or at least on this map, are in place now. So let's, we'll add a fishery. We got a lot of water over here. And now fisheries are a little different. Just give you a chance to show that. See, there's actually two lines coming out of the central circle here. So the one we're rotating is the entrance. The other one, because fisheries are the one resource that has a water entrance. So in this case, what I'll show you quickly is we'll switch over to the path region mode, which we showed in the last edit. We'll draw a little water here. Select that, turn it to water. Go back to our city. And now you can see the light blue line, which is the water entrance for the building, has automatically snapped to the closest water region. So you can see that updates as we move it around. So it's important that fisheries have a water connection. At the moment this water doesn't lead anywhere, but you could connect that up to the larger bodies of water if you felt like it, or like the river along here. Okay, so we've got a few resources. If you zoom back out to the strategy map, you can see them here. Now the next step is going to go actually placing some props and decorating them. So all the buildings inside these cities are individual props that you can place. So the little pot here is the prop mode. So you can see as my mouse moves over them, you can see the individual buildings. So all these are purely decorative. They don't have much direct impact on gameplay, aside from indicating the state of the city, whether it's they'll start burning if it's under attack, and the number of buildings is often used to indicate the level of growth of the city. So we'll start. We'll go over to this farm here. We'll fill it in. So I'm going to switch over to the draw list here, which is another thing I've mentioned in the past. It allows you to show different hints in the editor. So path regions, I'm going to turn those on. Normally they're not on by default in the prop mode, but they can be helpful to see where we want buildings to place. Now with the trick of resource buildings, we usually place them on the edge of the map because we don't want units walking through the actual buildings themselves, because units can only walk anywhere where the red boxes are. So by putting it next to the edge of the map, we're going to place our buildings in the terrain where units can't walk through. So in the prop mode on the right, you'll see there's a list of a few options at the top. Terrain drag makes props move along the ground, so they'll automatically go up and down with the terrain, so they go under the water or up. The place in the water controls whether the props are drawn on the surface of the water or on the stuck to the terrain on the bottom. The prop circles just highlights where the props are on the map. And the other two modes we will get to a little bit later are overlays for reflections and construction levels. But we'll get to those in a minute. So to place our prop, we are going to go through the list here is props. Some are groups of props that have been put together into clusters. Others are individuals. The ones with the asterisks at the top are generally the ones that we've prearranged into groups. So we're going to go into resources, farms. We're going to go with a Gallic style. You can we've roughly clustered them over the Hegemony III designs. So we're going to go with a small wheat farm. So we select that in list, and the little error, just so you know, is a prop that doesn't actually exist in this current game, but that's not much of a problem. So we got a guy there, some props. So to select them, you can use any of the selection, move, or rotate tools. Left click. Shortcut number 2 goes to the move tool. So you can move them around, move them up or down. And the rotate tool, generally you only want to rotate on the y-axis or perpendicular to the ground. Okay, so we will place that here. Rotate in. And shrink it down a little bit so it's the level. And we got a resource building. One of the things the game looks for is a flagpole. So most of our resource buildings and cities will have a flag that indicates who's in control of it right now. So to place a flag prop, one quick way to finding it is we can use the search box here. So clicking on that, I type flag. It finds the flagpole in the list. Select that, draw tool, and we got a flag. So in the editor, you'll find the flags are undefined. So they tend to be blank, but it's because we haven't defined what factions are available in this game. So we'll place that next to the farm. And a few little touch-ups. We'll go, in reminder of the first episode, into the texture painting mode. We're going to take some rich soil, draw tool. That's way too big a brush. Select a little brush here, and paint some dirt underneath the farm so it looks a little more realistic. Alright, and there is our farm. I'm going to place a couple trees back in here. We're going to get into trees in our next episode, so I won't dwell on them too long, but you're welcome to experiment with it. Move that tree a little bit out of the way so you guys can see the farm. Okay, we got a resource building. Simple as that. We'll do one more quickly just to show you guys a few more of the tricks. This time let's go up and do a mine. So up in the mountains it's a little different. So I'm going to clear these trees away. One trick that's not too obvious if you played with the editor is in the tree mode you can right click with the tool to quickly get rid of trees. Clear out some space. Going back into the terrain mode and draw, we're going to level out the terrain a little bit for our mining camp. And then go into the prop tool. One quick trick you use a lot is the K button, or this button here will close the list and reset it. So, because this list has hundreds of props in there, it can get pretty long. So, going back into resources, mine. Let's take some of our previous mines here. Mine with a cliff. We'll drop that in. So, that gives us a whole bit of different props. Now you can see, because I've got the train drag mode on, as I turn it around, these kind of adjust with the map, which is okay for this scenario. I will want to tweak a few things. So let's... Alright. Now these guys are all, when I select these, the whole group lights up. Anything on the right side list with brackets around it is a group of props. Now what I'm going to do is open the group. You can see here at the top. I can do that with the Y button as well. Y button toggles it open or close. So if I open up the group, that allows me to select these things individually and move them around a bit. So we're going to move this mine entrance a little more in. Shift some of these rocks around. So we've got a number of, most of the terrain is actually the base terrain mesh, but we also place a lot of rock terrain on top of it to try to sculpt certain areas, and there's a lot more patterns you can do with the actual props. There's limits on the slope and overhangs and stuff for the base terrain, but using meshes like this we can create rocks that stick out more and cliffs and other neat features. Alright, so we're going to move this camp. So I can drag select a bunch of props. Oops, I don't want that. Yeah. 3, rotate, put the camp part over here. Having a camp as part of a... oops, I forgot the guy that was on the bench. So he's just sitting there. Move him over. Another nice shortcut is the O key. Rotates 90 degrees. We tend to use that one a lot. So we'll put him back on the bench. There we go. And let's... the other shortcut here to show you quickly. So these guys, they're floating a little bit. If I hit the end key, Oops, actually he's pretty good, but demonstrate it that way. The end key will snap things to the ground, which is another really handy shortcut. So we got a bit of a mine here, but we're gonna dress it up a little bit more. We've got a mine crane. I'm gonna put in, let's see, do that here. The rise, and reset that. Do a couple smelters on how they extracted the metals from the ore. Smelters like this to burn it, so we'll put a couple there. I'm going to open that group, select just a smelter, another one. These smelters actually use a special kind of prop that draws terrain on the bottom. So you see that brown matches up with the rich soil. So in a second, when I start drawing the textures underneath it, you'll see how that will blend into the smelters. And while we're doing it, let's put another cliff. Actually, that's not quite the cliff I wanted. I want a steep cliff. Then we're going to go back to resources, mine, scaffold. That's another. So we can, this is a pre-done little segment of some miners working on a cliff. Line that up. Okay, and we're going to put in a few more rock segments here so it looks a little rougher. And some, well, you can look up the all the props in the list on the right. One of the fastest techniques is finding something you already want on the map, just selecting that, and then you can immediately start placing it around again. The another shortcut is the spacebar. We'll place stuff on the map. And so I'm now using the scale tool. The uniform scale tool sizes it proportionally, but if the non-uniform scale here lets you, if you want to size it in a particular axis, so I can make this really wide, which works better, not for some props. Rocks, you can get away with a little bit of distortion. People, obviously less so. Alright, so that's not a bad little mine there. We got some guys mining away, some campers. So the last little touches, we're going to switch to the terrain tool and get rid of some of this grass. So I mentioned the rich soil blends in with those smelters. So we'll do that around there. And we're going to do some loose dirt here. While I'm getting this, a couple people have asked on the forums, sometimes while they're painting the train it suddenly goes black. That happens. I can duplicate it here. When you have, oh, I need to do more. There we go. When you get too many textures on the same area, there's a limit to the number. So if it does go black, you can hit undo and get rid of the last one you did, and usually that should return it. Or if you really need to, you can just paint over that whole section again in one color and start it again. So I'm going to go back to my Latium Mountains here and just clean that up. And then, alright. A few more rocks around. Sink those down. And we're going to put the flag there a little more prominent, where players can see it. And we'll replace a couple of the trees that I took out. And gray. Oops. Actually, this is a good chance to show skins on the rocks. So we have a couple different rock textures, and everything in the game can use a skinning system. And for people unfamiliar with modding, skins are basically just the texture wrapper for the same kind of object. So we will switch, use the plus or minus keys here. So that switches it to a different texture. We've got a few different ones defined for most of the rocks. So that's what we use in the Tuscan area. But I want the first skin, which is equivalent to this gray rock here. So I'm going to select the rest of my... Actually, I can probably just group select those and set that skin. So those match a little better with this gray rock, which lets me go back and touch it up a little more here so they blends in. It's a little, there we go. So it's less of a seam between the terrain and the mesh. Alright, and so there's mine. Okay, next part about props, we're going to take a look at the city ones briefly. Now we've already filled in a lot of cities, so I'm just going to show you how some of the other prop features work in relation to the cities. So selecting this, you can see these are all, many of these are big groups. So we can select that dock, hit Y to open it up. We're going to select just the roof and use, you can see where it says refract and reflect. You can basically tell which props you want to be able to see in the water. So these ones, they're above the water, but they're right next to it, so we want to turn reflections on. So it's the L key, you do that. So now we can see the roof there. And by selecting them all individually makes it a little more efficient for the game to, rather than drawing absolutely everything as reflections. You can highlight just the ones that you can really notice. And now that we've got those, we can turn the reflection overlay, which I was talking about earlier. So that's a quick way of seeing which props have reflection and refraction stats turned on. So the dock segments here are have reflections and refractions turned on because they're in the water and next to it. Whereas these top parts, the roof segments, only have reflections turned on because they don't actually go into the water, so we don't need to see them through it. For those unfamiliar with the term, refractions just control the amount you can see below the water line. Because by default, let's say if I just move this in here and turn that off, you can't actually see it. It gets cropped off by the water. But if I return the refractions on, there we go, now you can see it underneath the water there. Let's move that back over here. Oops. We don't want train drag on, because we're not sticking it to the train. There we go. Okay, the other overlay we're going to talk about is the construction overlay. So, if you're familiar with most of the cities in the Hegemony 3 game, as you grow, the cities build and add more buildings to them. So we can see how that's configured by turning on the construction overlay. So all the cities get orange tinted, which is the lowest construction level, which means they'll be visible when you're at the population 1. But in order to show buildings growing over time, we move some of the buildings into higher construction levels. So, for example, this little dock segment, let's say we don't want that to appear at the beginning of the game. So we use the page up and page down, or the levels here. So we're going to switch that to level 2. And we will switch, let's do this little segment here. Level 3. That guy would be level 4. Make that whole cluster level 6. Okay, so you can see that we've defined the certain buildings to appear at different levels. And I'll show you how that works. What we're going to do is go to the File menu up the top corner and hit Advanced Mode. And that turns on a few different new tools that you don't regularly need. So we're going to set our test level all the way down to 1. Now you can see a number of my buildings disappeared. So that's what this city would look like at population 1. So all the buildings that I set to higher levels aren't there. There's a couple animations coming back for the construction. So hit level 2. You can see that one comes in. And level 3, level 4. And those ones came in at level 5. So depending on how the prop is constructed, which gets into some of the entity XML files, you can have buildings that appear when a building's hasn't been constructed yet, which is what you were seeing briefly for this cluster, versus what appears once the building is officially constructed. So we do that, some of the temple buildings do that, so they have a placeholder building before it's officially constructed. That's where you'll see that. Okay, so that's placing props and resources. If you've got any questions, as always, let us know on the forums, and hopefully we'll be back soon with the next episode, where we're going to get into trees and grass. All right, thanks for joining us.